Happy Valentine's Day. So, it's Romania Black. It's technically the day before Valentine's Day, but still. So, we had Januyaoi last month, and I really loved it, and I was really sad to see Januyaoi come and go. And so I want to, throughout the year, keep doing more reactions to BL series and BL stories. And so I was like, it's almost Valentine's Day. Why not? So my second entry into our inaugural Januyaoi was Winter Cicada, Fuyu no Semi. And I really loved that story. It was incredibly sad, but it was beautiful. It was a great love story. And some people on Patreon and in YouTube sent me afterwards a link to the manga chapters that took place in this series called Embracing Love. So the idea that, as I'm aware of, is that there's a 14-volume manga series called Embracing Love. It's a BL series. And a few chapters of that series was what Winter Cicada was. It was like a little standalone story amidst... from what I know, the only thing I know about Embracing Love is that it's a modern day story, and that Winter Cicada was a little one-off few chapters that were dedicated to it that was kind of like supposed to be like a glimpse into these two guys' former lives, like their past lives, and in their past lives, that was the events of Winter Cicada. So supposedly, Embracing Love is the current modern version of these two guys. They get reincarnated and reborn in this current timeline. So, you know, it's kind of funny. In Winter Cicada, they were lamenting that they were born in the wrong time period. They couldn't be together. And now they are. So I was like, oh, okay. So that's all I know about this series. I had several people request that I do Embracing Love that Winter Cicada is actually based off of. So I kind of did the spin-off before I did the main series, which... why not, you know, like I do. So I did decide that for Valentine's Day, I'm going to watch, it's a 2 OVA series, Embracing Love, called Cherished Spring. It's Haru Daiteita. And so I'm going to watch the 2-volume, the 2 OVA episode version of that. And then just like I did with Sex Pistols and Love Pistols and with Fake, I'm going to watch this OVA and then go back and read the manga. So there's going to be a little bit of a jump. You may notice that I look one way watching, I'm going to wear the same shirt, but I'm going to basically look one way watching the OVA, and then I've come back after I've read all 14 volumes and talk about the manga. So exciting stuff, right? Happy Valentine's Day. You know, whether or not you have a partner in your life or not, there's no good reason not to enjoy a good BL story. So that's my motto about it. So it's freezing cold where I'm at right now because it's the dead of winter. It's Valentine's Day, so I opted for a nice glass of coffee instead of wine. And so just to warm myself up with that anyway. But I'm pretty excited, y'all. Other than the fact that this takes place during modern times, and it's the two main guys are basically the reborn versions of the guys in Winter Cicada. Other than that, I have no clue what the story is about. I'm going in blind, as per usual, and then afterwards, I'll go back and read the manga and get the full story, because it's 14 complete volumes, get the full story, and then come back and talk with y'all and tell you what I've learned. So I hope y'all enjoy this and have a wonderful Valentine's Day. But with that being said, let's start, shall we? I'm pretty excited to get into this. I found 2 English subtitled versions on Vimeo that someone graciously, Nikki Tomohisa, gladly put up. I'll put links to them down below in the description so y'all can go watch them yourselves. But yeah, let's dive in, shall we? We are going to start our old Embracing Love. I think this OVA series is called Cherished Spring, which is a funny little contrast to Winter Cicada. I like it. But we are going to start that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Okay, I do want to look up the actors for this. Embracing Love actors. Because the actor that played Kikuchi at the very end he just sounded like I should know who that is. Okay. So I want to see who plays, let me see, Kai. Let's see. So we have Iwaki. We have Katao. And let's see who else we have. Uru Shizaki is Peter Parker. Okay, let me put on here. Uru Shizaki. Okay, that's Peter Parker. Okay. And then I want to know who is the actor that plays... I want to know the actor Embracing Love. was it? Kikuchi. Who plays him? Who plays him? Ken Narita. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. So after I was done watching that, I had to go look up the 3 main actors, and we got some names on there, but oh my gosh. Okay. So, wow. It's so weird. And I was trying not to, but during the entire reaction, I was like, this is like Winter Cicada, because Winter Cicada is the spinoff. It's the prequel spinoff to this series. And Winter Cicada is like the historical past life of these 2 characters. And a lot of the things they do in this OVA set, and a lot of their character and personality traits are similar to the personality traits of their former lives in Winter Cicada. Makes a lot of sense. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty excited to read the manga now, but I had to go look up who the 3 main voice actors were, who Iwaki was, who Katao was, and then who was Kikuchi. And Kikuchi at the very end there, he sounded really similar. So Kikuchi, our villainous bastard that wants to be a snake, he is voiced by Ken Narita, who is a veteran voice actor. I'm trying to look on here and see if there's any that I recognize. There's a lot of anime that I know about, but I'm not sure of. Let me see here. He's been in Code Geass. What else has Kikuchi's voice actor been in? Narita. He is, let me see here, in Naruto. Let me see, Rurouni Kenshin. I'm trying to see if there's something he's been in here that I would know and have watched, but these are all older roles. He's in a lot of roles from like the 90s, like 90s and early 2000s anime, which is fine. There's not really anything he's done that I think I've seen, but I know I've seen, okay, he was Ashita in Bleach. Oh, weird. Okay, so Naruto was Ashita in Bleach. That's funny. So he's Kikuchi. Okay, interesting. And then the voice actor for Iwaki, our main guy there, our black-headed guys, is his voice actor is Toshiyuki Morikawa. And I'm trying to say who he has voiced. He's Poe! He's Edgar Allan Poe! Okay, so he's Edgar Allan Poe from Bungo Stray Dogs. That's what he plays. And he also plays, I'm trying to see if there's any other characters that I would recognize that he has played before. So he's played Poe. Okay, fair enough. And he's played the Ubuyashiki from Demon Slayer, the head of the Hashira. All right, cool. He's played him, makes sense, and he was Blanca in Banana Fish. Okay, so there we go. So Iwaki, his voice actor, was Blanca in Banana Fish, as well as Poe from Bungo Stray Dogs. Interesting. So that makes sense. We've seen him before. And then Katao's voice actor, his voice actor is Shinshiro Miki. And I'm trying to see if there's any. He was Jesse from he was James from Team Rocket. Okay, from the Japanese version. And then, so he's James. Nice. Makes sense. But what else has he been in? He has been also, I'm trying to see if there's any roles that I would recognize that he has played in. And I'm not seeing, it's a lot of supporting roles. There's not really any that I'm recognizing. I'm trying to see, let me see if there's any recent ones, but I don't think so. No, nothing that I've seen recently. He's in Uramichi Oni-san, which I eventually want to see, but interesting, cool. I wonder if there's any old roles that he's been in. I want to check that out. But yeah, these voice actors, they did such a good job in this. I really liked it, but let me see if there's any other roles. He's mainly just played Jesse, or James. I keep saying Jesse. He played Roy Mustang. Oh, he's Roy Mustang's voice actor. Okay. All right, fair enough. He was Roy Mustang. That's so funny that he's Katao. Interesting. Okay. And he also played Urahara from Bleach. Funny that. Okay, cool. Awesome. So, nice. I want to get that voice actor information because their voices sounded familiar. I watched Bleach a lot when I was younger, so that's probably where I'm recognizing their voices in. But, man, yeah, so this is interesting. What a love story. I'm really excited to read the manga because I feel like this was derived from from the manga in like maybe volume, like one volume, or it's like volumes 2. Because see, in Fake, when I watched the BL series Fake, the OVAs was taken from volume 2. So by the time you watch the OVA, these two characters have established each other and they know each other. And so you had the first volume of the manga to kind of set everything up, and then the OVA is on the second volume when you already kind of get the gist of what's going on. So it's like, okay, that makes sense. But that's interesting. So yeah, so basically I'm curious to see where this OVA is going to derive from manga-wise. Because there's 14 volumes, so there's a good chance that a lot of storylines have been chopped up and condensed to make this OVA. So it'll be interesting to see the manga and see what all it entails. But yeah, so Iwaki and Katao are two adult video stars. They said AVs, adult videos. So basically they're male porn actors in these pornos, and they both are trying to go from the adult film industry into regular film. And they've got this like aspiring fan club, like the ladies, the Women's Land Weekly, and all these ladies are like big giant fans of them. They have big fan clubs, and so of course the paparazzi's after them. And then I got his name. I looked up his name, old Peter Parker. It's Uru Shizaki. Uru Shizaki. He's our Peter Parker, our photographer that's following Katao around. That is our convenient Deus Ex Machina. I'm like, look at you. But yeah, so Iwaki is ashamed kind of his AV roots. He wants to move past them and leave them behind. Whereas Katao is from the OVA, seems like he's like, no, we need to embrace where we started from and recognize that and use it as a weapon. Like, use our AV roots to like, it's propelled us into the rest of the film world, so we need to use that and take advantage of it and be like, yeah, we're sexy and hot, let's do it. But Iwaki's like, we're not always going to be like that. He's like, we're not always going to be these hot young guys. We're eventually going to age and get older, and we need some security. We need to like, move past those rebellious youthful days into something that has more dignity and integrity. And Katao just doesn't feel the same way. It's interesting. And Iwaki has a lot of insecurities. He's like, I don't know why somebody like you, who's dazzling and beautiful, like Katao, he's like, I don't know why somebody like you would like me. And Katao's like, what? And so Iwaki thinks that all of this is just fleeting. He's like, Iwaki is convinced that Katao is just thrown into his role. He's just acting, and the acting is just making him fall in love with him. And he's like, it's not real. He's like, once the passion burns out, you won't want to stay with me. And he's so insecure, and I hate that, because Katao's like, no, I like you. Quit worrying about stuff that's not happened yet and just be in the present. And Iwaki just isn't doing that. And so I like that this kind of, they involve the media and the paparazzi, and it kind of shows like their day-to-day lives, and it shows the paparazzi's influence, like when Katao goes out with the woman and it's this big news story, like it's something that you would see in real life, right? And I like that when Iwaki, he gets jealous and mad about it, and Katao's like, who are you going to believe? Some stranger from the press or me? And that's such a true thing. Like, they're in this relationship seemingly, and he's like, do you not think that my word is more valuable than any of these other people's? Don't you trust me? And so that I like that this OVA deals with like issues of trust in relationships and how they view it, because Iwaki kind of avoids, he doesn't want to put the label on them as being lovers for a long time, because he's thinking about their reputation, and he's thinking about their futures as film stars. And it kind of is touched upon by Kikuchi, who is the older AV film star who had the scandal and went away to America for 10 years to get away from the scandal. And when he comes back, it's so sad, because Iwaki, like, he was his big fan. He's like, oh, I was a big fan of yours. And Kikuchi totally takes advantage of him and totally uses him, because he's jealous. He says, oh, what Japan has become. He's jealous that Katao and Iwaki can have this relationship and can thrive in their relationship and their sexuality. He's jealous of it, because he's like, when I was a star 10 years ago, I couldn't do that. I had to hide who I was. And when there was a scandal, it ruined my career. And you all are using it and making it like just, it's making your popularity grow rather than destroy it. And so he's jealous of that. And he goes as far as he tries to drag Katao and Iwaki down. He's like, Katao just had this scandal, and all these fangirls view you, Iwaki, as this pure soul. So if you get involved in the scandal, it'll completely destroy your reputations, and it'll ruin your public image and destroy your film careers. And he just wants to drag them down in this burning ship. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, it's insane. But yeah. Oh my gosh. It's crazy. And that's what he tries to do. I can't believe it. But yeah. And so, but then luckily Peter Parker, old Urushizaki, he takes the photos, but rather than turn them in, he uses it to the film director to kind of be as a blackmail, because Katao gets in the fight, which I was wondering when he took the photos, I'm like, he likes Katao, I think. And I'm like, would you really hurt Katao's lover that much? Would you really ruin his reputation knowing how it would affect Katao? And he doesn't. He takes the photos and he uses them as blackmail against the director, because Katao gets in that fight with Kikuchi the next day, and they're going to shut off the film project and, fire Katao. And he's like, no, let's not do that, because we don't want your film getting any more bad reputation. So what if you guys just worked something out? So I'm like, Which I'm curious. I want to go back in the manga and read that scene again, the blackmail scene, and see exactly what he says again. Because it's kind of, I was paying attention, but it was going so quickly that I want to see exactly what goes on in the manga with this. But there's so many scenes. The rap party where Katao doesn't show up, where he doesn't show up there, and then Katao confirming that they're in love, and the whole thing with his dad, like the whole thing with his father, like his father writing the letter and calling Iwaki and asking him to go on the interview and make up with him. Oh my gosh. And Iwaki for the longest time saying they're not lovers, and then in the end admitting that they are. I feel like the manga is going to stretch that out and give more depth to it, so I'm excited to read that part of it. But I am happy that Katao's dad was accepting that. He's like, you love Iwaki and I'm okay with it. Just, make sure you guys work it out, because Iwaki's a good guy. And it's like, cool, all right. But yeah, the whole scene with Kikuchi just dragging Iwaki away was so heartbreaking, because you're like, no. And it all makes sense at the time, because Iwaki's like, he's just fanboying over Kikuchi, and Kikuchi's like, let's just ditch this scene, come with me. And Iwaki's so starstruck, he's like, okay, I don't like parties to begin with, and Katao knows I don't like parties, so he'll be fine with this. And it's like, no, he's not fine with this. And then, oh my gosh. And then yeah. But at the end, Iwaki's saying, he's like, is this even real? He's like, you don't deserve someone like me. Like, I'll just drag you down. He's like, you're wasting, this isn't going to last forever, so you need to take advantage of all the opportunities you can, and don't ruin it because of someone like me. And Katao's like, you're an idiot. I love you, so stop. And then finally Iwaki admits it. He admits that he loves him too. But yeah, there's so many good scenes in this. I like the use of the paparazzi, the whole thing of the popularity, and the commentary on how Japan has changed from when Kikuchi was an actor to now, and showing how more open that the public is to people like Iwaki and Katao that have a relationship, and him commenting on it. It's interesting. So this has me really hyped to read the manga. I really want to read the manga now and see this all expanded. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and check out the manga, the 14 volumes. I'm going to take my notes and then keep my notes on the show and everything. And then we're going to come back and talk about the manga. So I'll be back, y'all, and we'll talk about our old Embracing Love. Oh my. So that took a lot longer than I anticipated. I plowed through what I thought was going to be 14 volumes of Embracing Love, and it turned out to be 20. So we'll explain those mysterious 6 volumes that are at the end of this, but I'm going to talk about the 14 volumes of Embracing Love first. I thought, when I read Sex Pistols, I got it done in like 3 or 4 days. I was like, it's fine. 3 or 4 days, I plowed through that insanity, just got it out of the way. But with this series, it took me a solid week and a half. I'm glad I started this project early, because if I'd waited till around Valentine's Day, I wouldn't have had it done in time. It took me literally, and it was like every night reading volume after volume. And it took me a week and a half to get through these 14 volumes. Was it worth it? Yes, that is why I brought out Whiteboard Coon. This is Whiteboard Coon, explainer of all things. As you probably noticed in the thumbnail, I was going to put lots of sex here, but I didn't know if YouTube would if that was illegal to do. So we're going to do lots of smut, because let's get this out of the way first and foremost. This is not a first-timer BL series. It's just not. If you want to go read Seaside Stranger, restart after returning home. I'm going to do a 10 after 10 on that, a 10 out of 10 on that. If you want to read Fake, Fake's a great starter BL series. This is like the upgrade from Fake. There is a lot of smut. A lot of smut in this series. It's good, but it almost gets to the point where there's so much smut that by volume 14, I was like, yep, we know, let's get back to the story. When you're wanting to get back into the story in a yaoi, that's when you know there's a lot of smut. When I was sitting there going, okay, we get it. If I'm saying that, there's a lot of smut. So this series, there's so much going on, and it's 14 volumes. So I had to bring Whiteboard Kun out and break this down. I figured the volumes are kind of in chunks as I see it, and so I took like a bunch of notes. So I got a bunch of notes up here to go through and talk about. But this is a very long-running series. Yoka Nida, who wrote this series, and the actual Japanese name is Haru Daiteita, or Embracing Love. And the series started in 1999 and ended in 2009. So it was a good 10-year series. Like, she spent 10 years, like a decade, on these 14 volumes. And then we talk about the other 6 volumes. It's like another 7 or 8 years after that. So this woman has spent nearly 20 years on this story of these two individuals. It's kind of crazy, and I kind of love it, because she really just, it's their story. It's the story of Iwaki and Kitao. It's their story, and I absolutely am in love with it. So Iwaki and Kitao are two guys, as we saw in the OVA, and they are in fact adult video. They call it adult video, AV. They are basically male porn stars in the Japanese AV world, who have decided that they want to branch out and start doing actual film. And so there's this author that we learn about called Sawa Nagisa. And Sawa Nagisa is a very interesting character. And Sawa and Kitao and Iwaki and a few other characters kind of go through the actual entire story, but the other characters we saw in the OVA are just in those first couple of volumes. The OVA covers volumes 1 and 2, which I figured that was the case, and I was like, okay, well, volume 1 and 2 is over. What else is there? I've already got the other side of what Whiteboard Kun already wrote. It's like, there's so much that happens in this series. So much. If you want to run through every possible thing that a relationship could have happened to it, you should read this series, because every possible thing that could happen with a relationship happens between Iwaki and Kitao. It's kind of amazing, because they go through the gambit with everything. And usually most of those storylines end with lots of smut. So it's fine, right? I have no complaints, but there's a lot of graphic smut. They spare no expense. Just like in Winter Cicada, where they're like, you're going to see it happen. Oh, you're going to see it happen in this quite a lot. I was 10 volumes in going, there's a lot of sex in this. It's like, oh my God. And they try literally everything. So if you need ideas, you should read this series. But yeah, so basically, Iwaki and Kitao decide that they're going to audition for this role in Sawa Nagisa's novel. And Sawa Nagisa wants to write this BL story, this yaoi story, and adapt it into a movie and then hopefully a TV series. And they're kind of running independent, because they don't think that a regular distributor will publish it, because it's about two men. And so Iwaki is the older one. Iwaki, I'm going to call him Iwaki. He's the older one, and he gets the lead role because he's the more experienced actor. And he's I would view him as our main character. We follow through most of the story from Iwaki's perspective. And in the last 6 volumes, it's going to become apparent why that is. But for the most part, I was like, okay, this is really all from Iwaki's perspective, and Kitao is his partner. And we do get some things from Kitao's perspective, but anytime we go off by ourselves with a character, it's Iwaki. Iwaki is the one that we focus on. We don't really have any solo stories with Kitao. It's mainly just Iwaki where the solo stuff happens. And everybody's attracted to Iwaki, which Kitao's a really good-looking actor, but everybody's all about Iwaki for some reason. He's the one that gets hit on this whole series. Kitao, I'm like, he's a really good-looking guy, but he does not get hit on like Iwaki. But he has the clout, he gets the lead role, and then afterwards, there's a TV series started, and Kitao gets added on to the TV series that it's based off of. So basically, just like in the OVA, Sawa Nagisa is meant to be androgynous, and we actually get Sawa's backstory in Volume 5, so I'll talk about that a little bit later, but just keep Sawa, the author, in the back of your head. So yeah, and it's great. Like, the very first time Sawa meets Kitao and Iwaki, they're like, okay, well, to figure out who's going to get the lead role, I need you guys to have sex. It's like, wait, what? And Sawa's like, well, most of this movie is going to be sex scenes, so I need to know which of you can perform better who's going to be the better actor. And so they enact the sex scene that's in the OVA. The OVA covers most of the volume, but there's little things I noticed that the manga explains in more detail. Like you see that sex scene between them, and it gets talked about in the OVA, but in the manga it's broken down. You're like, oh, okay, this is why Sawa's doing what they're doing. It's like, okay. And I want to make note that Iwaki and Kitao, they originally don't know if Sawa is a man or a woman, and that's kind of made a thing, and you'll find out later that Sawa is a man. Sawa is transgender. So it's like, okay. And then basically Kitao instantly agrees to the sex scene. Kitao's like, yep, let's do it. Let's see who's better. And Iwaki is the one who is like hesitant but doesn't want to be shown up and agrees. And Kitao questions whether Iwaki is gay because of the scene. And Iwaki shoves him off and says, well, we're just acting. No. So Kitao is pretty much comfortable in his sexuality from the start, and Iwaki is the one who knows what he is, but he's not exactly comfortable with making it public, because Iwaki is all about his public image, and he's been in the industry long enough that he knows. A lot of this series honestly reminds me of Given. I wonder if Kizu takes inspiration from this series, especially in certain parts. I was reading it going, this seems like something that's brought up in Given. Huh. And so I wonder if Kizu's read the series. I'm sure they have, because this is like 20 years old. It's a classic series. I'm sure that they've read it. But there's lots of little moments, like the idea of Iwaki stressing the importance of public image. I kept thinking back to Given, and how as a band members, when Haruki tells Uenoyama and Mafiu, he's like, you guys can't publicly be in your relationship. We have a band image to maintain. We want to keep fangirls and stuff. And that's kind of how Iwaki views it. He's like, I know I'm gay, but I don't want to put it out there because of my public image. And it's like, okay. So that all kind of flies in the face of Kitao, because Kitao's like, well, that's stupid. And so Iwaki gets the lead role in the film, which is why at the beginning of the OVA we see Kitao looking wistfully at the movie like it should have been me, because in the manga he thinks it should have been. But then it's decided they're going to make a TV series to follow up the movie, because the movie's really popular, and Iwaki keeps his main role, but Kitao gets added on as the co-star. So that's why when they're filming, they're working together. That explains why they have like the big hot and heavy scene on the couch. They're practicing. All that comes into play. So Iwaki gets a little bit nervous because he's afraid that Kitao is going to steal the spotlight. Like, he views Kitao as so dazzling. Like, for Iwaki, it's sort of a love at first sight, but he doesn't want to admit it. And he's afraid that he thinks Kitao is so dazzling that he's going to just steal the spotlight and take all of his thunder. And Kitao thinks the exact opposite. So it's really interesting. And Iwaki's also afraid that because they work so closely together, and because they're in lots of sex scenes together, he's afraid that the public and the press is going to think that him and Kitao have a thing going on and that they're a couple. And so he's afraid there's going to be a big scandal. And he's afraid that the scandal will lead to him not being able to get future roles in television series and movies, and he'll have to go back to the adult film world. Iwaki very much wants to distance himself from his past in the adult film world. He's like, that's where he started, but he wants to get away from his roots. He does not want to acknowledge them. Whereas Kitao is very much like, no, I know where I came from, and I'm going to use it. And that gets talked about in here. And like it said, using it as a weapon is brought up. Like, use your background as a weapon. That gets brought up later on in the series. But anyway, so Kitao embraces his sexuality fully, and he plans to use it to work his way up. He's like, yeah, I know I'm gay. I'm totally going to use that to my advantage, because these BL roles are going to be coming out. So yeah, I'm going to use that to get the parts. And it's kind of very forward thinking. Like, this was back in 1999. Like, this was very, I feel like it's just kind of ahead of its time thinking. The idea that Kitao is like, yeah, these roles are going to be happening, and they're going to want actual gay actors, so I'm going to fit the role perfectly. I'm hot. It'll work. I'm like, interesting. And so Kitao decides he gets the great idea that he's going to start this paparazzi story where the paparazzi finds out that him and Iwaki are actually in a relationship. And so he starts this big old thing where he says that the two of them are lovers. And that's why in the OVA there's all the cameras, everybody following them. Kitao's spreading the story around that they're in a relationship. And Iwaki, he's afraid that if he denies it, it's going to create an even bigger scandal. So he goes along with it because he's like, well, damn it, I don't have a choice, because if I deny it, then it's going to be an even bigger scandal, so I have to go through with it. And that's where Arushizaki, our Peter Parker guy, comes in. Let me say for the record, Urushizaki in the OVA, I thought he was like this cute little stalker. He's a lot creepier in the manga. He's a lot more of a stalker. Like when we first meet him and we see his apartment, and I'm scrolling through my notes, when we first see his apartment, it is decked out in portraits of Katao. It's like a Hey Arnold Helga shrine is what it looks like, of just pictures of Katao everywhere, and it's like on his bed sheets and everything. He's a full-on stalker. And he's probably the only character that really has a thing for Katao in the series. Everybody else is always after Iwaki, but Katao, Urushizaki is the only one that's like totally stalking him. And it's kind of creepy, I will be honest. It's a bit creepy. And he even starts to style his hair like Iwaki because he thinks that Katao will notice him that way. And then he does in the manga look kind of like Iwaki. And there's even this really creepy masturbation scene where Urushizaki like masturbates to Katao thinking that he's Iwaki. It's weird. It's very weird. But he kind of gets his hopes dashed because he runs into Katao, and Katao accidentally mistakes him for Iwaki. And Uru gets really mad because he's like, you didn't recognize me for me. You saw me as your boyfriend. And it's like, well, you've been trying to imitate him this whole time. So yeah, kind of. And he realizes that Katao doesn't like him for who he is, but just thought it's really messed up. The good news is that this is only in like the first 2 volumes. So we don't see Peter Parker much after this. He like pops up frequently, like just as a side character, but the whole stalker thing gets taken care of pretty quick by the end of the first volume, into the second volume. It's a pretty short story, but he gets upset about that, and then he gets even more upset when you find out that his apartment was catty corner from Katao's, so he could like open up the blinds, look through the window, and see Katao from the other side. Creepy. And so then in the OVA, when the two of them move in together to keep the fake story about them being lovers going, then Urushizaki gets really mad because he realizes that Katao's moved away and now he can't stalk him. So he does this dramatic, epic destruction of his room. It's great, but that's pretty much how he resolves that, is he just gives up on Katao. For the better, because it was a really creepy subplot. I'm going to be going through the main plots of these volumes. When I get to Alive, it's going to be filled with lots of spoilers. I'm going to try to keep this relatively spoiler-free, but just know that I am going to talk about some major plot points. And I feel like I'm going to talk about more with these first couple of volumes because they are covered in the OVA, and we just watched that. So there's no spoilers with that. So yeah, like I said, Iwaki and Katao, they move in together as part of their act, just like we see in the OVA. But Iwaki actually starts to grow jealous of other people liking Katao. He starts to get jealous of it because he thinks that he actually starts to, kind of fall in love with Katao, and he doesn't like other people being around him. And he tries to pass it off as being jealous of Katao's status as an actor growing. He tries to pass it off as that. He's like, well, I'm just tired of you getting the limelight, and you're young. And because there is an age difference between the two of them. Like, Katao is in his early 20s, and Iwaki is in his late 20s, early 30s by the start of this series. And by volume 14, Iwaki is like in his late 30s, and Katao is still in his late 20s. So there is an age gap there, and Iwaki often gets insecure about that. He thinks that he's aging too quickly as an actor, and that he's not going to be able to get these good roles that these younger actors are getting, which is a pretty valid concern. I mean, that happens a lot in modern day film, because once you hit 30, it's like your roles start to change as characters, and Iwaki is noticing that. He's afraid of that. So he tries to use that to pass off why he's jealous of Katao, but we as the audience know that Iwaki actually likes Katao. He just doesn't want to admit it, right? So we find out later why he doesn't want to admit that when Katao calls him out, being like, you're not jealous of my status, you're jealous of these other guys. And Iwaki admits that he's never been in love. He's never been in love. He's made love to people, but he's never been in love. And it's crazy, but I love this line. After he admits that to Katao, Katao tells them that he wants to, quote, be an eyewitness to his fight with himself on falling in love. I love that. I love Katao's like, well, finally. He's like, I can see you're falling in love with me, and so I want to be I want to be in the front row watching you fall in love and realize it for the first time. It's so good. Like, their relationship is absolutely wonderful. I love it. So we find out lots of things about Iwaki and Kitao in the first couple of volumes, which I like the setup because it's going to be payoff later on, which anytime a series sets stuff up subtly at the beginning and it has major payoff later, it's so good. But we find out that Iwaki is not close to his family. He kind of left his family and went to start this film career. And he's kind of, again, that ties to his insecurity about being an adult film star. That's where he got his start because that was the only place, I guess, that would take him. And he's embarrassed about it. And he knows his family wouldn't have approved of it. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why he's distant with them and doesn't want to go back home. But he also doesn't want to go back to his family because he is gay, as he ends up confessing, and he doesn't feel like they'll approve of that lifestyle. Kitao is absolutely the opposite. Kitao, again, is very comfortable with his sexuality and is very close with his family, especially like his sister. And they all know about his lifestyle and they're totally fine with his sexuality. They know that he's a film star, they know that he's in adult films, they know he's gay, and they're totally chill with it. And so he brings Iwaki with him as a wedding guest to his sister's wedding that happens in Hawaii in America. And so they go there for the week. Of course, it's like a vacation beach getaway. So there's lots of beach smut, like lots of stuff happening. Basically, in between each of these little bullet points here, there's lots of smut. So just keep that in the back of your head. I mean, there's lots of. It's the perfect blend. It's basically the phrase of porn with plot or porn with feelings. That's this series. That is this series. It's yaoi with feelings, yaoi with plot. Like there's actually a story and substance happening, but sandwiched in between all that, layered like an Oreo, there's lots of smut. So just know that. But yeah, so basically they go to Hawaii and his family's super open-minded, but the dad gets mad at Iwaki going because it's not because Iwaki's gay, it's not because the two of them are in a relationship, but the father gets angry because Iwaki is a film star and he thinks that they're going to bring the press to his daughter's wedding and he doesn't want the press and their relationship, like, taking the spotlight from his daughter's wedding. It actually ends up being really cute. And so the sister is totally chill with it, though. She's fine, and everything ends up getting blown over. She insists Iwaki come to the wedding, and Iwaki is basically welcomed into Kitao's family. It's actually really, really sweet. And plus, you find out that Kitao's mom kind of looks like Iwaki. It's a little off-putting in the manga because as I'm reading the manga, anytime you see Kitao's mom, she has short black hair and kind of looks like Iwaki. It's kind of odd, and I always think that that's Iwaki's mom, but it's Kitao's, so I'm like, it's one of those moments, right? But then, yeah, so Volume 2 has a chapter called Nude Dance, which is fitting, and it welcomes Kikuchi into the story, and Kikuchi is our antagonist of the original OVA, the former adult film star that was kicked out of Japan that comes to try to throw a wrench in Iwaki and Kitao's relationship. And Kikuchi, he actually plays up Iwaki much like he does in the OVA, but he is much, much more violent. He basically sexually assaults Iwaki. It's not fun, and it explains why Kitao gets much more aggressive in the trailer. Like in the trailer scene in the OVA, you're like, man, he really gets mad. Yeah, no, Kitao gets even more mad in the actual manga because Iwaki is actually sexually assaulted. Like when Iwaki comes back into the apartment, he's like so distraught from what's happened with who he considered his hero, and Kitao gets super pissed off. But Iwaki confronts Kitao and tells him not to throw away his acting career on his behalf because he won't get an opportunity like being in this series in the future, he doesn't think. And he admits that he does love Kitao, and the rest of the volume plays out like the manga and the OVA. So it's great. It's really good. Peter Parker comes in and helps blackmail. Basically, the OVA does a pretty good job of covering volumes 1 through 2. The manga gives us more detail and does so in a much more expanded package. So then we get to volumes 3 through 5, and I've lumped these kind of together. So volumes 3 through 5 are more into the relationship. Like I said, this is like the Friends of Yaoi. Like it covers everything. Everything you can think of happening with a couple, it covers. And I'm just going to do an overview of what's going to happen. I'm not going to spoil everything because I really do want you to go read this series. Now, whether you read the last 6 volumes or not, we'll talk about that. But volumes 3 through 5 get more into their relationships. What I really like about this set of volumes is it talks about themes with relationships that I don't think a lot of series bring up, and they do so in a really interesting way. So there's discussion about consent, meeting each other halfway. Like Katao is always down to go to town. Katao is like, let's do this all the time. And Iwaki's like, let me breathe and then we'll be good. Like Iwaki is not nearly as horny as Katao is. Katao is like ready, like as soon as he gets home from work, he's like, pants off, let's do this. And Iwaki is like, let me finish my dinner. One of those things. And so there's this thing right at the start of volume 3 where Katao and Iwaki are having like a little riff in their relationship because Iwaki is like, this is just too much. We need to slow down. We need to slow down. And Katao's like, why? And Iwaki has this really cool reflection where he realizes that all of their lovemaking and every time they are intimate, they're doing it in Katao's room. And they're doing it in Katao's space because Iwaki isn't comfortable having Katao in his space yet. And there's a big discussion about it, and it's very sweet, and it ends, the conflict ends with Katao getting welcomed into Iwaki's room and them getting intimate there. And it's like, and you get to see the differences between their rooms. Like Katao's room has like a giant queen-size bed with like leopard print, bed sheets, and it's like all this elaborate stuff. And then you go to Iwaki's room and it's like a tiny little twin bed. And it's like, it reflects their personalities in interesting ways. And I like just like the visual symbolism that you get throughout the series with little things like that. It's really nice. So we also established this idea about learning and keeping the past. Like, what do we learn from the past and what do we keep from the past? And so Iwaki goes through this big thing where he wants to just get rid of all of his old films, like all of his adult video films he wants to get rid of. He wants to dispose of them. He wants to ditch that part of his past. And Katao convinces him not to because he's like, that part of your past is what led you to me. And it's what led us to be together. And he's like, and I love you for that. So I don't want you to throw away something that is part of the reason that I love you. He's like, you shouldn't be ashamed of it. And it's a big storyline. It's really interesting. And he's like, this part of you from your past is part of the man that I fell in love with, so I don't want you to get rid of it. And so they also go through the prospect of moving and the idea of keeping part of the past and leaving it. So we had this keeping the past with keeping his films from his former career, but then we have the idea that their apartment that they're sharing together, the one that they used to fool everybody until it wasn't a joke anymore, they decide that they want to move into somewhere new. And it's really sweet. Katao laments, he's like, this place is where we had all of our firsts. When we first made love, when we had our first kiss, when we had our first fight. He's like, this has all of our firsts in this place. And he's like, and I don't know how I feel about leaving it. And then Iwaki, in traditional adorable fashion, he's like, well, we'll make new memories at this new place. And it's very corny, very cute. And so then they move to like this posh giant penthouse because they're film stars and they can afford it. It's like, it's great. I absolutely love it. They move in this beautiful home. They joke that they're married, and Katao actually gives Katao feels really sweet after Iwaki gives him that pep talk about moving, and he gives Iwaki a ring, and Iwaki's like, I didn't get you a ring, what is this? And he's like, oh, it's just, it's just to maybe feel out, what it would be like if we were engaged. We're not really engaged, we're not really married, but it's kind of what it would be like. It's like, I will say that the one downside is that the retailers online to try to find the English versions of these manga, you can really only find volumes 1 through 3. And then volumes 4 on are really hard to find in English. And so I actually had to go through a translation. And I will say that is the one downside with my review of this series is that I was reading off a translation. And the problem with that is that sometimes the translation just doesn't look as good. Again, bless you those that translated this manga into English, because I can't imagine translating 14 volumes worth of material. I'm so thankful that they did that because it's not available otherwise, but it does, the translation is a little bit off sometimes, but again, won't complain because I'll take it if I can get it. But they move into this beautiful home, and the one thing about it is that there's 2 beds, which I guess is pretty common in Japan, but it's funny that they just have 2 beds side by side, and then throughout most of the manga, they ending up in the same bed anyway, so it's kind of funny that they have 2 beds to have their own space if they want it, but usually they end up in the same bed. Again, for lots of smut. So in volume 4, the story takes a pretty serious turn in volume 4. And so we get Iwaki's mother passes in volume 4. And he laments, like Iwaki gets really sad and depressed and laments that he didn't spend a lot of time with his family because he was ashamed of his career and he was ashamed of his sexuality in front of them. And so it made them distant, and he laments that. He's like, I didn't get to see my mother before she died. Like, it had been years since he saw her. And Katao convinces him to go back home. He's like, you need to go see her. You need to go see her at her memorial. You need to go see your father. He has a brother, we find out. His brother's a prick, but we find out he has a brother, and his brother's married. And he's like, you need to go see your family. And so Katao convinces him to return and goes with him. But there's this really sweet scene where Katao's like, I'm going to go check into the hotel and hang out there, because Katao realizes, he's like, they haven't seen Iwaki in years. The last thing they want as they're grieving their mother and wife is to see Iwaki show up with the boyfriend that they don't know about, and it to be a scene. So Katao's like, I'll go hang out at the hotel, you go see your family and like get with them, and then I'll come later. And so it's his brother's a massive prick when he first meets him, though. He's just really, he tells Iwaki that it's like his fault that their mom died, and she had constantly wanted to set Iwaki up in arranged marriages, and unless Iwaki goes through with one of those arranged marriages, it's gonna, like, her spirit will never rest. He's just a big massive prick, right? And so there's that plot, the arranged marriage, trope, and Katao ends up being like, what's taking so long? And he basically realizes something's wrong and rushes into the house in the middle of Iwaki and his brother's argument. And during the argument, the dad has been like off sleeping, like grieving. And the dad wakes up and gets involved, hearing all this hubbub. And it's actually really, really good, because I thought that Iwaki's brother was just a massive prick. But you find out from the dad that he's under a lot of stress. And that basically because Iwaki has been off with his film career, that his brother had to take over the family business, had to basically, it reminded me a lot of It's a Wonderful Life. It reminded me of when George Bailey and Harry Bailey gets to go off to college and get a job, and George stays at home and takes care of the family business. It reminded me of that, except Iwaki's brother is the one that stays at home with the family business. And he's just really stressed from it, and he feels like Iwaki hasn't pulled his weight in the family. And so that's the whole deal. That Iwaki, he's jealous of Iwaki's freedom and what he doesn't have because he's had to stay back with the family. And so in the end, the dad actually approves of Iwaki's relationship with Katao. He's like, I love the line he says. He says, well, Katao suits you better than any of the women chosen by your mom. And it's like, aw, like he accepts Katao. And even though the brother doesn't seem quite comfortable with Katao dating Iwaki, by the end of it, he sends him off when they're leaving. And Katao comments, he's like, you and your brother are actually pretty similar, and that's why you don't get along. You're too closely, you're both stubborn and you're too similar. That's why you don't get along. And it's like, And so also included in that is the idea of going through relationships with long distance, because Iwaki and Katao both have jobs on sets of films and TV series, so they have to kind of be apart from each other for different projects, and it's like them trying to maintain their relationship and keep it fresh. I won't spoil you about the lots of smut that's involved, but there's lots of smut involved trying to keep the relationship going. It's great. And then in Volume 5, we get Sawa Nagisa's backstory with Yukihito. That was the one part of the OVA that I was like, what is going on? I was like, what is the deal? What are we talking about with Sawa? What's their character like? I really like Sawa's backstory. So Sawa, we find out, was a detective, like a police officer and a detective. It was like a homicide detective, and was on all these homicide cases. And during one of the cases, they're on this location at like they're basically at a theater stage, is where there was a drug raid, and it was near this theater company, and in the backstage, Sawa sees this tube of lipstick, and Sawa takes it. And so it's interesting. He steals the tube of lipstick and makes this commentary right off the bat. Like, you see Sawa steal the tube of lipstick, and then the next page, Sawa said that their entire life they had been making an effort to meet their parents' expectations, and meeting his parents' expectations had become a religion. And I like that. I like the idea that meeting your parents' expectations becomes a religion that you dutifully, follow, right? And then Sawa says, I didn't realize that this religion was suppressing my nature. So his parents, we find out that Sawa has always wanted to be a woman, and Sawa hasn't really ever come to terms with those emotions, except when they stole the tube of lipstick. Like, there's lots of times where Sawa's like, I want to put the lipstick on, I want to dress differently, I want to be more feminine, and Sawa is terrified of that because it flies in the face of everything that they've thought their parents has expected. At this point, Sawa still recognizes himself as male. And so he says, this flies against everything I recognize that my parents would have wanted for me. But he realizes in that moment, he's like, this is trying to meet up to my parents' expectations is completely suppressing who I am inside, and I'm not comfortable with that. And so there's an interesting conversation that Sawa has later with the person. They catch the person who's selling the drugs, who happens to own the place where the lipstick is stolen. And it's funny, the guy that was selling the drugs was saying that the clients using the drugs were dealing with crises that they were facing with society rejecting their identity. And Sawa finds themselves connecting with that. Like the guy selling drugs is like, yeah, a lot of my clients were actors and they had to act a certain way and it was driving them crazy. And so the drugs were just helping them cope with that, with the fact that they couldn't, have any agency towards their own identity. And Sawa immediately doesn't like to admit it, but they're like, that's how I feel. Like, I can't, Sawa's like, I didn't know this part of me existed, but now I do, and I want it released, and it's not being let out, and it's driving me crazy. And so while Sawa is going through this identity crisis, there's a case that he's put on, and it's for that of the murder of Yukihito's mom. So that little kid, Yukihito, who's 13 at the start of this volume 5. I don't know how old he is when the events of the OVA take place. I think he's only like 16 or 17, though, so he's still a kid. Like, still a kid whenever that whole thing went down in the OVA. Still young, but at the time he was 13 when Sawa met him. And his mother had been murdered by Yukihito's father. Yukihito's father and the mom got in an argument, and the argument got heated, and the dad accidentally struck her and killed her inadvertently. And Yukihito's stuck in the middle of all this. And so Sawa gets put on the case, and we find out that Yukihito has gone completely silent. Like, Yukihito's taken a vow of silence after the murder of his mother because he's so horrified by his father accidentally killing her that he doesn't want to speak anymore. None of the therapists, none of the psychologists, nobody can get him to talk. But he sees Sawa. There's a scene where Sawa is about to meet Yukihito, and Sawa has had the lipstick with them the whole time. And in the moment, Sawa, in a moment of, they say weakness in the manga, he puts on the lipstick, being like, I need to feel more comfortable, and he feels comfortable with the lipstick. And in that moment, Yukihito sees Sawa and thinks that Sawa looks like his mother and speaks out for the first time. And so it's kind of creepy. It's a little bit creepy because Yukihito kind of associates Sawa as his mom in a way. So it is kind of creepy, especially when you see the stuff that goes on in the OVA. But Sawa kind of takes in Yukihito as his ward, which is also kind of creepy, but especially since he's 13. But it'll come back up. Their story comes up later on. But by the end of Volume 5, Sawa realizes that she is actually a woman, and she just can't help it. She can't help her past, but now she wants to be a woman. And so Sawa, by the end of Volume 5, has completely transitioned over and is like, no, I'm a woman. I'm just trapped in a man's body. It's like, and there we go. And so Sawa decides to take care of Yukihito as a ward, because they don't have anywhere. The dad's put in prison, and Yukihito has nowhere else to go. So that's Volume 5. Fun times. And so then we get Volume 6 and 7. And Volume 6 and 7 is all about balancing work and relationships. And I really like Volume 6 and 7. Volume 6, it continues with Kitao and Iwaki's life as they balance their work and relationships. This guy, Asano, comes in, and of course, he tries to stir the pot. He tries to get in a relationship with Iwaki. He tries to flirt with him. Everybody's trying to flirt with Iwaki, and Iwaki's like, no. And Kitao quickly puts him in his place. Kitao's like, no. He's mad at Iwaki for a little bit because Iwaki tries to have a friendship with Asano, and Kitao's like, that guy's trying to use you. No. And so stuff happens. Lots of smut. But by the end of it, Kitao puts him in his place, and Iwaki and Kitao have a very interesting discussion about the relationships that they have and who's the top and who's the bottom. For the record, this gets brought up very early on, and around this time it gets brought up again. But Iwaki has a thing. Iwaki is trying to rationalize to Kitao that just because he's the bottom in the relationship doesn't mean that he's not strong. And there's lots of times where Iwaki gets mad at Kitao because Kitao will be like, oh, hey, sweetheart, or princess. And Iwaki's like, just because I'm in the bottom in this does not mean I can't be masculine. And I really like that conversation because Iwaki's like, just because I'm in this position doesn't define who I am or define me or confine me to a stereotype based on a gender norm specific role. And it's very interesting. And so Iwaki, he's basically talking to Kitao throughout Volume 6 about what that feels like, and the idea that being a bottom in a relationship doesn't mean that he needs to be compared to a woman. And at this point, that's where we get the Winter Cicada chapters introduced. Right after they have the discussion about their positions in the relationship. Because at this point, they've been fixed. Like, Kitao has always been the top. Always. Through 6 volumes, he's always been the top in the relationship every single time. And as the conversation about gender keeps getting brought up and the gender norms and roles associated with those positions, I kept being like, when are they going to switch? And they don't yet, but it keeps getting brought up. But we pause on that discussion to introduce the Winter Cicada chapter, which they're exactly like the OVAs. If you watch the Winter Cicada OVA reaction I did back in Januyaoi, it's pretty much it. It's basically the same thing. But, after that, we had this little side story, and Iwaki, for the most part, Iwaki is definitely the more, it's odd. Iwaki and Kitao are both very emotional characters, but they're emotional in different ways. Kitao gets very jealous. Kitao is a very jealous character. He doesn't like people flirting with Iwaki. Iwaki does not seem to be jealous, but Iwaki is more internally emotional. Like, stuff with Iwaki's identity bothers him a lot. Like, he can get very insecure. He can get very down on himself and very self-loathing, and all of his emotionality is kind of tied to himself, whereas Kitao's emotionality is connected to other people. Like, Iwaki is introverted in his emotions, and Kitao is extroverted. Like, what happens around Kitao bothers him, and what happens internally bothers Iwaki. So we have this thing where, at this point in the story, I'd have to go back and reread, but Iwaki, we go back to this idea about gender, roles in the position, and Iwaki laments that he's not a woman. Iwaki laments to himself, he's like, I want to give Kitao a child, and I can't do it. And it's a really interesting discussion because Iwaki is like, we're in this relationship, and I should be the one having a child for Kitao, but I can't because I'm a man. And it's very interesting, but he gets so depressed and down about it through various other things that I won't spoil to you, but he gets so down and out about it and distraught that he almost commits suicide. And you're like, what? No! You're like, no, Iwaki! And Kitao is like, let's just get out of here. Let's just leave. Let's go on a trip. Let's go on just a trip with the two of us, and then we'll get back together and everything will be okay. You just need a change of scenery. And so they go on a trip to America. They go to California. And through a series of miscommunications, they meet this guy named Carl. And Carl will have significance later on in the story, but they meet this, wealthy philanthropist Carl and his lover. And they end up, getting into an argument and then becoming friends with them. And as it turns out, Carl is ordained. And Carl, at the end of Volume 6, is like, hey, why don't y'all just get married? Just get married. You guys want to get married, right? Let's get married. And so they get married. They have a ceremony there in California. They have one. And he's like, okay, you're married. And I don't know at this point, because this is Volume 6. And so the series ran from 1999 to 2009. So I'm not exactly sure when Volume 6 would have came out at in there, if gay marriage was legalized in California. I'm assuming either it was or this story is taking place in the future when it would be. So the thing that Nita does a lot with this series is that there will be moments later on that happen in the future, and Nita kind of alters the future in how she wants it to be altered, so it's kind of interesting, but we'll talk about that later. But yeah, so they get married. They get married, and then they go home to tell everybody that they've been legally married in America, and now they're a couple, and of course the press is like, oh my God, and it's a big old thing. And so Volume 7, though, is when they get home from America, they discover that their home was broken into. And nothing was really stolen, but Iwaki gets again, really insecure because he's like, someone was in our home, someone was in our space, someone came here, they know how to get here, they know they could hurt us. And he gets really afraid of that. And it's a very valid fear. Like, he gets really scared about it, and Kitao has to like calm him down and be like, no, I'm here. As long as we have each other, it's okay. It's very sweet. There's so many moments in this series that are honestly really, really sweet. And I'm like, oh my God, it's very cute. It's a very, very cute series. Up until a point. But we'll get to that. And so, yeah, they just have this really, really cute scene where they talk about, you know, it's fine, we're secure as long as we have each other. They go back to breaking down gender expectations because they're like, well, now we're we're married, so are we husband and wife? Are we husband and husband? And the funny thing about it is, even though Iwaki is the bottom in the relationship and Kitao is the top, throughout the rest of this series, Kitao refers to themselves as the wife and Iwaki as the husband. And so it's really cool that you have these characters in these positions that we see in yaoi as tropes, but then when they're married, the roles that they take on or the duties they take on are reversed. And it's like, But even though Kitao is the wife, Iwaki does all the cooking because Iwaki is a better cook. So it's like, yeah, okay. But it's really interesting. I like it. And so Iwaki's brother visits, and Kitao has to keep him company. It's really super awkward. Iwaki is on a set of a production that day, and so Kitao has to keep the brother-in-law comfortable. It's a very awkward chapter, but by the end of it, you find out that Iwaki is going to be an uncle. His brother and his wife are expecting, and so that's like the big reveal. And so then in volume 7, we have a plot with Sawa and Yukihito. And man, this series it runs the gambit on the smut. It does. It's like any possible relationship thing you could think of, this series is going to do it. So we go back to Sawa and Yukihito that we met in the OVA and then we expanded upon in volume 5. And in volume 7, we get more of them. And Yukihito's getting older, like a couple years. We find out a couple years have passed over the course of the series. Time moves throughout this series, but it moves so subtly enough that you don't notice it at first. And by volume 14, you're like, oh God, 10 years have passed. And you're like, So it's very, very interesting. But Yukihito, while he's away, Sawa is trying to write a new novel and needs to experience the love that's happening in it, just like he tried to do with the foursome in the OVA, except this time it's S&M. And he hires a guy to come in and do it with him. And Yukihito gets mad because he didn't know about it, and he walks in while Sawa is basically tied down and gagged, and Yukihito's like, what the hell? And so he freaks out, of course, and he gets mad, and the only place he can think to go to is to go to Kitao and Iwaki's house. So Yukihito goes there, and he laments to Kitao and Iwaki. Yukihito, he laments that he wants to be in a relationship with Sawa, but he feels like Sawa will only see him as submissive. He won't see him as a dominant character. Yukihito's like, I want to be in a relationship with Sawa, which is kind of odd. Again, it's weird. I'm not totally on board with Yukihito, like, Stockholm syndroming into this relationship, but it is what it is. So we just roll with it in this series. But I'm not entirely comfortable with it, but it could be worse. Sawa's pretty harmless, other than liking Yukihito. And Yukihito laments to Kitao. He's like, I want to be in a relationship with Sawa, but I feel like Sawa is only going to ever see me as a submissive person or a bottom. And he's like, that's not what I want to be. I want to be the top in this relationship. And Iwaki breaks in and he's like, well, it takes a lot of courage to be the bottom in a relationship, to be the submissive person, because it takes a lot of self-sacrifice and you have to, there's a lot more to it than you think. And so he's like, if the love between Yukihito and Sawa is mutual, then it's okay. It doesn't matter. He's like, whether you be a top or a bottom, he's like, don't let any stereotype dissuade you. He's like, as long as you're comfortable and you and Sawa are mutual about it, then it's fine. And Sawa and Yukihito, after that, end up developing a relationship. And there's this really awkward scene. It reminded me of Forgetting Sarah Marshall, where there's a scene where Yukihito and Sawa are basically... Luckily, the manga has enough tact to it where we don't see Sawa and Yukihito have sex. We don't. I feel like that's Nita being like, nah, you won't get to see it. But so it shows Kitao and Iwaki in bed, like they're in their separate beds trying to fall asleep, and you can hear Sawa in the other room like screaming Yukihito's name, and Kitao's like, what if we did it at the same time and tried to make it a contest? And Iwaki's like, no. It's great. It was a really funny moment. But yeah, so then Winter Cicada is announced to be made into a movie. It's very meta. It started as just a chapter in the series, and I guess it probably became so popular in the manga that Nito was like, okay, we'll just add it to the plot. So part of the plot of this series now becomes that Iwaki and Kitao are going to be making the movie Winter Cicada. And it's like, oh, cool. They're making the movie, and they want to reprise in their roles. And so Iwaki is instantly hired to be his role in the film, but for Kitao's role, Iwaki actually doesn't know if he wants it at first. Iwaki actually says he's against it at first, which is like, oh. And so we find out that Iwaki is afraid of Kitao getting that lead role, and the two of them like being on set all the time and getting into arguments and breaking up because of it. Because so far in the manga, other than that opening part in Volume 1, Iwaki and Kitao have been on separate projects. So they all meet at the end of the day, have lots of smut, but they're not on the same set 24/7. And Iwaki is afraid that if they are, they're more likely to get into arguments and they might break up because of it. So he's worried about that. And Kitao, again, like Given, he pulls a Haruki. He does, because he gets mad that Iwaki's like, don't you trust me? He's like, don't you trust that our relationship can stand the test of time and blah, blah, blah. And so, and Iwaki makes like a side comment being like, well, you know, your hair's too long to be that character anyway, and you'd have to wear a wig and stuff, so it's not going to work out. He goes and chops off his hair, just like Haruki, and he's like, and he comes in with his short hair, and Iwaki's like, oh my. And he basically like fights for the role and gets it. And he's like, no, we're going to be in this project together, and it's going to work out. And so there is a really, really cool thing at the end of the volume. And as Kitao gets the role, I really like that Kitao, he critiques Toma in Winter Cicada. He critiques his decision to leave England at the start of that OVA. And so Kitao's like, I think Toma was stupid for leaving his lover behind to go to England, because he's like, why couldn't he have just stayed and they worked it out? What if something had happened to his lover while he was gone? Like, he should have stayed behind. And he does a big critique of it, and it's very interesting. I like that Kitao's character makes a critique on his own character in Winter Cicada and their actions, and it shows how the relationships between those two characters are different than Iwaki and Kitao's. It's very, very interesting. So yeah, then we have volumes 8 and 9, and I'm going to flip Whiteboard Kun over. Again, as per usual, lots of smut. So we have volumes 8 and 9. So that was pretty much the halfway point of the series. Is we started Winter Cicada. It's all getting started. Again, this series is really long. There's lots of stuff that happens. And so volume 8 and 9, again, Kitao, as Iwaki predicted, starts to feel the pressure of filming. He starts to feel the pressure of being on set. And it's starting to get to him. Like, he's trying to make this the best movie that he can, and he's getting flack about it. And so during this time, we meet two of Kitao's friends. I put friends in quotation marks because they're very odd and they don't always act like friends. But their names are Yu, I'll call him Yu, and Tomoki Miyasaka. He's called Miyasaka throughout most of the story, but Tomoki he's called when they first meet them. And so they're his friends, and Yu and Tomoki kind of show up and they become buddies with Iwaki. And Kitao gets kind of jealous and mad about that. And he's like more jealous and mad than usual. And you're like, you're really acting odd, Kitao. Why do you care? These guys seem pretty legit. No, you find out why he doesn't want them being around Iwaki. And the reason is that we find out that around the time Volume 1 happened, like before Iwaki and Kitao were in like an established official relationship, Kitao may or may not have had an orgy that involved Yu and Tomoki. It gets brought up, and Iwaki's super pissed off about it because he's like, we were in a relationship. And Iwaki and Kitao's like, well, it wasn't really official at the time, so... And it becomes this big thing, and Iwaki gets super mad, and Kitao apologizes, of course. And then here's the thing. Yu and Tomoki, or Miyasaka, they like eavesdrop and like to like put their noses in all of Kitao's business. And Kitao's like, oh, you guys are still here eavesdropping? Fine, I'll give you all. You guys want a show? I'll give you a show. And so he just basically has sex with Iwaki in front of them, and Iwaki doesn't realize it. And so it kind of backfires though, because the two end up blackmailing Kitao about it. They're like, we'll tell Iwaki that you had sex with him while you knew we were watching. unless you agree not to do anything physical with him for the rest of the filming. And like an idiot, Kitao agrees to do it. But it only lasts for a certain while because Iwaki nearly falls off a platform at some point during shooting, and Kitao saves him, and Kitao comes clean and explains the whole situation, and Iwaki's mad at first, but he's like, okay, whatever. And that's kind of where the story seems to end, but it doesn't, because we find out that Miyasaka, even though him and you have been Kitao's friends, Miyasaka has developed this crush on Iwaki, because of course he has. Everybody has a crush on Iwaki. But Miyasaka Tomoki, he realizes he has a crush on Iwaki after he witnessed them having sex. He was like, oh, this guy would be fun to have sex with. And he, like, develops this crush about him. And Iwaki keeps begging Iwaki to, like, just give him a kiss, or, like, just do this. And, of course, Iwaki's like, no, go away. But he won't do it. And so during the filming of Winter Cicada, there is this little thing brought up where the film is, in jeopardy of being financed, and Iwaki's super stressed, and Miyasaka tries to take advantage of him during that time. But just before Iwaki, like, crumbles, Carl, the guy that married them way back in Volume 6, he shows up, and it turns out that he's this great philanthropist that likes backing movies. And so by Deus Ex Machina, old Carl that married Iwaki and Kitao, he ends up financing the rest of the film because he thinks it'll be great. And it's like, cool, awesome. And so it ends up working out. And so, yeah, we also meet Aizawa's actor. Aizawa was the guy in Winter Cicada that was the antagonist. No, we meet his actor, Yoshizami. Sweetheart. Cinnamon bun of all cinnamon buns. A total cinnamon roll. Aizawa was, like, so evil and slimy in the Winter Cicada OVA. Yoshizami is like a precious angel. He's a literal saint, and he's super, super nice, and Kitao and Iwaki become instant friends with him. Like, he's really, really cool. And he has a lot of faith in the project. He has a lot of faith in their relationship, Iwaki and Kitao's. He's just a really, really sweet person. And Yoshizami, he tells Kitao that people can change over time, and that it's okay to still love them despite that. Because Kitao keeps noticing under pressure that he feels like him and Iwaki are not the same people 8 volumes ago that they are now in this relationship. And Yoshizami is like, well, that's okay. He's like, you guys have known each other for years. It's okay that you change. As long as you still love each other, that's all that matters. Like, you guys can be different people as long as you both recognize that and you still love each other. And it's very, very sweet. It's this very heartfelt moment. And then, of course, after something really heartfelt and nice, something drastic has to happen. So this fire breaks out on set. The scene in the Winter Cicada OVA where they're escaping the village at the very beginning and they jump off the cliff, they're filming that scene and the set catches on fire and they don't have the water hooked up properly, and so the fire just spreads. And so Yoshizami, in an act of utter kindness, he basically sacrifices himself, grabs all the film reels, and runs out with them and ends up saving the film. Unfortunately, he inhales enough dust and smoke through the fire that it completely ruins his voice. And when Iwaki visits them in the hospital, Yoshizami's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to finish the role of Aizawa in the film. And so they're freaked out because they have to find somebody else to replace him. And that becomes a big ordeal. And so the volume ends with that going on, and Iwaki's niece, Hina, is born. So we see like a year pass over the course of the next couple volumes. So I like that as Nita was writing the story, it takes place over a 10-year period, and the manga itself takes place over a 10-year period, which is nice because I feel like as a reader, as you followed along with the story, it'd be kind of cool because as you followed along, you'd also grow with the characters as well. So it's really, really cool. But then we have volumes 10 through 12. I didn't write a lot of notes for this volume because I loved it. So, finally, for 9 volumes, Kitao has been the top and Iwaki has been the bottom in lots of smut. In lots and lots of smut. And I'm not saying it got boring, but I was like ready for a change up. And so, volume 10 starts out with this game of dice where Iwaki and Kitao find this little pair of dice that have like different directions and they both roll them. And so it says like kiss body organ or like lick ear or something like that. And so Iwaki rolls and it says insert organ. And he's like, oh. And so Iwaki gets to top and Kitao has to bottom. And it becomes a thing. Like, they both do it and they realize that it's okay. And from then on, they're kind of switches. They just kind of switch off and on. And it's like, good, great. Glad we've established this in a relationship. Glad this is a thing now. Needed some refreshment. Good job. And then it's good that we had that because, again, after a nice wholesome thing, we have something crazy. So the Miyazaki guy that had a crush on Iwaki, yeah, that hasn't gone away. And he breaks into the hotel room that Iwaki is staying at and basically sexually assaults him. And you're like, what the hell? And so Iwaki fights back and injures him, and Miyazaki basically threatens to blackmail him that unless, Iwaki has sex with Tamaki, he's going to, explain that he was injured and assaulted by Iwaki and blame it on him. And Iwaki's like, because you find out that Iwaki gave Miyazaki his hotel key because he wanted to talk to him about a project, but he didn't think that Miyazaki was going to sexually assault him. So it's this big thing, but Miyazaki tries to basically blackmail him. And so Katao, of course, gets super pissed off. And Yu, who I think likes Miyazaki in this, Yu gets pissed off too because Yu's like, you should not have done that. What are you doing? Katao's our friend. This is messed up. And so they all converge together in this big squabble. And Iwaki is like, fine, I'll have sex with you if you bottom. And it ties back to the whole dice game because he's like, oh, now I can top. We're good. So he's like, fine, you wanna be having a sexual relationship with me? Fine. You bottom, I'll top, and we'll do it. And in that moment, Tamaki, he's like, I don't know. And Iwaki's like, see, now that is why it's not going to work. Because he's like, Katao, when I told Katao to bottom, he didn't even question it because he knew it was with me. He trusted me. We love each other, and it was totally a fine thing. The fact that you have to think about it and you're not comfortable with it and you want to just be in control over me isn't going to work. And you can argue that that's not maybe what he's meaning, but that's what his argument is against Miyazaki at the time. And he's like, Katao never cared about what position it was as long as he was with Iwaki. And after that, Tamaki seems to give up. Like he gives up on Iwaki after that moment because he realizes it's just not going to work. But Yu gives him a proper scolding, which is good. And so then, yeah, Winter Cicada, the movie airs. It's a hit. Everybody seems to like it. Iwaki gets a new job from it. He gets a job on a TV series as a villain. So there's a lot of different scenes where him and this director are talking about him becoming a villain character. And he starts to lament, too, that he's getting older as an actor. And this, again, kind of flares up Iwaki's insecurities. He's like, why am I getting the villain role? Is it because I look older? And that's kind of what the director says. And Iwaki gets kind of down about that. He's like, oh, I can't be like the hero anymore because I'm older. And so his insecurities start to flare up just a little bit. And Katao tries to like dissuade him from feeling self-loathing. And so in the meantime of all this, the director like kind of falls for Iwaki at the beginning and wants him to be the villain because Iwaki, the reason why he hires him is because Iwaki like yelled at a guy on set and he got really fiery about something, and the director was like, oh, I want to see that Iwaki. I want to see that fired up guy. And so Iwaki's like, the director thinks that Iwaki's all lovey-dovey with Katao, and that's why he won't get fiery. So he suggests that Iwaki break up with Katao to like get that fire back in him. It's dumb, and Katao's like, that's stupid, no. And they eventually like work past it with lots of smut. And then after that, Katao's like, you know what? We need to just strengthen our relationship, spice things up. What if we got into S&M? So they basically get into S&M for a while. It's a thing. It happens in like volume 12. I'm like, okay, we're 12 volumes into this. We've done everything under the sun so far. I shouldn't be surprised. Sure. But mainly it's Katao dominating Iwaki, which is interesting. And we find out that Katao has to be the dominant one in this, and he wants Iwaki to be the submissive because we find out that Iwaki, he can't take what's dished out. He doesn't want to be the submissive. He's terrified of it. And you're like, oh, it's interesting. But yeah, so then we have volumes 13 and 14, which are a roller coaster of emotions. I was wondering how this series was going to end, and it is a straight up roller coaster. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, we basically have Iwaki is getting older. He's in his late 30s by this point. So these volumes came around 2008, 2009. So he's in his late 30s, and he's realizing that he doesn't want to be an actor anymore. He wants to move into a more administrative position. He wants to be like the president of his own film company. He wants to go independent. And so there's this big squabble about when he should go independent, should he not. But he decides he wants to go independent. Katao's still in his 20s, so he's still, able to act and to get lots of film roles. There's a subplot where Yukihito and Sawa have split. They've split up, and it's really kind of sad. Sawa is extremely depressed, and Iwaki, throughout this entire series, Iwaki and Yukihito kind of have an interesting relationship. They have more like a father-son or uncle-nephew mentorship relationship. But Iwaki finds Yukihito, and he's like, hey, Sawa's pretty torn up about you guys breaking up. Was there a reason? And Yukihito laments that Sawa always treats him like a kid, even though he's in his 20s now. He's like, he treats me like a kid, and I want to be the dominant, responsible breadwinner in this relationship. And he's like, I want to prove I'm a man and can take care of Sawa. And as long as Sawa treats me like a kid, that's not going to happen. He's like, so I had to leave. And so he said he's going to become a man and take care of Sawa, and that they're going to mend up their relationship eventually. It's like, cool, awesome. So again, Iwaki decides to start his own independent acting company. There's lots of circumstances that tries to prevent this, but he ends up getting the company off his feet. Him and this secretary, she's great. She's like his right-hand woman. And so some of the actors, he wants to help. He realizes that the AV industry and industry for gay men in film in Japan isn't the greatest of circumstances. So he wants to create this independent film company to help them out and give them a better an opportunity to work under a better system. And so he gets a lot of a lot of film actors to back him and want to join his company. But the president of the company that he's leaving takes notice of this and is like, oh, well, he's like, I really hate to see you go because you're like one of our best actors. But he appreciates Iwaki's prowess as a businessman and wanting to go beyond just being an actor and do something else that's going to contribute to the industry. And he really respects that. And he admits to Iwaki that Iwaki's become a son figure to him. And he actually says, he's like, I kind of love you more than my own son. And Iwaki's like, oh my gosh. And he agrees to kind of help back the independent company that Iwaki's going to start. And so around this time, there's this big, it's Academy Awards season. So it's the Japanese Film Awards. And Winter Cicada is nominated for Best Picture. And it's really funny that both Katao and Iwaki are nominated for Best Actor. They get into a squabble at first because one of them thinks that they're supporting actor and one thinks that they're actor. And we're both equal. And then we find out they are both equal. They're both nominated for main actor, for lead actor. And then they have lots of smut to celebrate. But so we have this awards ceremony, and Winter Cicada wins Best Picture, surprise, and then Iwaki wins Best Actor, and he tells Katao, he's like, well, now I can go out on top, I can start my film company as Best Actor, and next year, when you get done with your film project and you're nominated again, maybe you'll get Best Actor and I get to present the trophy to you, because it's kind of like the Academy Awards where the winner from last year presents the award for this year. And so it's really sweet, and they go to this after party. It's great. And what shows up? Apparently the president's son of the company that Iwaki's leaving is jealous that Iwaki was referred to as a son figure to his dad. He's on drugs, and he tries to shoot Iwaki at the awards ceremony. And he doesn't die. Katao saves him. It all works out. It's great. But yeah, so it's insane. There's this big old case about it, and Katao tackled Iwaki to save him, and it's all resolved. There's lots of smut, and you think that's the end of the story. And then it's volume 14 was how can we try to kill our main characters? We'll have an assassination attempt, and then we have an earthquake. And I got major. If you've watched Link Click with me, in the series Link Click, there's an earthquake. That's all I'll say. And there's one in this series. I was getting major flashbacks to Link Click reading this. I was getting a little worried. And Katao gets caught in the rubble of an earthquake. And he gets injured. And luckily, he survives. And Iwaki and him reunite. And they decide that they're going to renew their wedding vows. There's this big ordeal. They go visit Katao's sister. And Yosuke is her son that she has, Yosuke. And we found out that Katao's first name is Yoji. but Yosuke is her son, and they watch the toddler son, they lose him. It's kind of like Wushin and Wei Ying with Yan. That's how it is with them and the toddler son. And then Kitao keeps on acting while Iwaki tries to open up a studio. But there is a really, really good scene post-earthquake where I'll show some pictures to y'all, but Kitao, while Kitao's acting and Iwaki is like surveying the damage from the earthquake, him and the secretary are like, we just built this company up and an earthquake just destroyed all of it and took it all down. It's really, really sad. But yeah, but the series ends, the volume 14 ends with this project that Kitao had been working on. There's an awards ceremony. We go back to the Japan Film Awards a year later, and Iwaki is about to present the award for Best Actor, and Kitao's nominated. And just as you're about to find out if Kitao won, the series ends. And it's like, you know that Kitao won. You know it. You know he won. But it doesn't show you that. It's like, so yeah, the 14 volumes in this series, they're really good. They're really good. It runs the gambit. It's wholesome. It's great. It goes through every possible relationship squabble you can think of. But what I love about Kitao and Iwaki's relationship is that they communicate. They talk to each other about everything. Like every little thing bothering them, every little thing that they find fault in their relationship, they talk about it and they work it out. And it's really, really good. So I appreciate that and what the series does with that, because it didn't have to. But it's 14 volumes, so I mean, you run the gambit through everything. And it never feels, like towards the end it was feeling like, what else can we throw at these guys? But it never feels like over dramatic, like there's melodrama and then they move on with lots of smut. So it's really good, but it never felt like it was overkill. And so this 14 volume series was really good. And around the time I was finishing up volume 14, I scrolled to the bottom of the page and there was a little thing being like, you should also read. And it said Haru wo Daiteita alive. And I was like, is that a different series? That's a spinoff? And at this point I was 14 volumes in and I was like, what is this? And so I looked it up and it said there were 6 volumes. And I was like, I've read 14 volumes. What is 6 more? Okay, so I thought I was done. I'd read the 14 volumes. I was like, there's nothing left. And then Alive happens. So it's basically Haru Daiteita Alive. Ha ha ha. That's the series. It is 6 volumes. And they actually ran from 2013 to 2020. So it just finished. 2020 is when the 6th volume finished. So this series, the sequel series, was 6 volumes running for those 7 years on and off. And the art style stays the same. I will note this. Like the very first couple volumes, the art style is like the OVA. It's a little more harder. And then around volume 3, things like soften up a little bit. But the art style stays relatively the same. It's not like Fake, where Fake the second, the art style changes completely. No, this all stays the same. But there's lots of smut. Also a lot of pain. So I'm going to be doing spoilers for the last 6 volumes. Basically, if you want the happy ending, you need to stop watching this video right now. If you want the happy ending, you can stop with Embracing Love, the first 14 volumes. You can stop right there. It's a happy ending. You can accept that and be like, everything's great. If you want to do that, I would stop watching this video right now because I'm about to go into spoilers. And I love Alive. I love this series a lot, but it is painful. So are you ready? It's the last chance. Are you ready to go into these spoilers? Are you ready? Okay. All right. So it may not be as bad as I'm making it sound, but it was pretty painful for me. I was bawling my eyes out by the end of this, so if that's any indication. So we come to find out in this series at this point, this is happening basically 10 years later, right? Which is funny because she started the series about 4 years after the original series had ended. So it's about 10 years later in the future. So we got about 10 years later. So at this point, we have Iwaki. Iwaki is probably in his 40s, and Kitao's in his 30s, right? At this point. And so the whole series starts out by Iwaki feeling really bad. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, he doesn't feel good. Like, they're still having lots of smut. There's still lots of smut there, too. But he doesn't feel so good. And so it comes to find out that he has arrhythmia. He has a heart condition. Like, Iwaki, in his 40s, has a heart condition. He has arrhythmia. And his doctor is worried about it. His doctor says that it might be genetic. It could be all the stress from his job as the president of this company. Like, he's just like, you need to take it easy. And the moment that he said he had a heart condition, I got really worried because I was like, this is only 6 volumes. This entire 6 volumes makes you very concerned for Iwaki the entire time. Like, I was sweating bullets the entire time being like, I don't like this. And he has episodes throughout. He finally gets some medicine that he takes that makes him feel better, but you're like, ugh. So around this time, too, that we find out he has this heart condition, and it's something that should be seriously looked at, around this same time, we get Yosuke, who is the nephew of Katao. He also is starting to look very much like Katao. It's kind of like Michael in Banana Fish looks kind of like Ash. It's one of those scenarios, only Yosuke is actually related to Katao. So his nephew, Iwaki and Katao have basically adopted him like a son. He's basically like their adopted son. Everybody thinks that he's their son. He's with them all the time. Oh my God, there's an amazing part of this series where Yosuke, he has his first, wet dream, and he's embarrassed, and Iwaki, sits down and has the talk with him. It's amazing. I was like, what manga does this? But this manga does it, but he has, the talk with him, and he's like, I'm too embarrassed to talk to my uncle and stuff. I want to talk to you, Iwaki. And so Iwaki's like, let me explain how this works. And they have the talk. It's it's just great. It's a great moment. But Yosuke is basically, because he looks like his uncle, the film industry notices, and he becomes a child actor. He becomes a child actor in film. Not AV, thank goodness, but in film, like his uncle and his uncle's husband, right? So everything seems to be going really good. Yosuke is hanging out with him. He lives there basically. We don't really know what's up with Katao's brother-in-law. He's not really in the picture. So basically Yosuke kind of gets adopted by them anyway. And so around this time, this character shows up called Mirai Sho. Mirai Sho shows up. And I thought Mirai was a woman at first because they have very sleek hair but have very demure features. Yeah, Sho shows up and is like, hey, Iwaki, you're my dad. Yeah, so this is the thing. We come to find out that Iwaki, Mirai Sho, I call him Sho, Sho's mom was a manager of a film company that Iwaki got his start in. So she was a manager of a film company and had sex. She basically assaulted and raped Iwaki, though, because in the thing she basically says, I want to have a child with you. And we find out that Iwaki at the time was only 17 or 18 years old. He was only 18. Yeah, he says he was only 18 at the time, right? Because Mirai is in their 20s. So Iwaki is I was barely 18 when that woman made me have sex with her. And Sho's well, I'm 20 now and you're my dad. And so Iwaki, our guy that is known for being self-loathing and having lots of insecurities, is now torn because he not only has Yosuke, who is his adopted son, literally with Katao, practically, but he has an actual biological son who joins the same film company as Yosuke and Iwaki. So he joins the film company with them, and Iwaki becomes torn between love. He feels like he's torn between supporting the career of his adopted son, that's his lover's nephew, and supporting the career of his actual son, who is estranged and he doesn't really know very well. Well, then we come to find out that Sho's mother actually married this other guy, the guy who's Mirai, the actual Mirai. And Mr. Mirai visits Iwaki and is not too happy about all this because he's like, I know that Sho wasn't my son, but I adopted him into my family like you've done with Yosuke. And he's like, you're just showing up and ruining things. And Iwaki's like, I didn't mean for this to happen. And so there's a bunch of drama. It's crazy. Sho's mom is a wench. I don't like her. She's just there to cause trouble and try to get her son off on the right foot. And then the craziest thing happens. So there's this director named Chiba that we get introduced to. And I don't like Chiba at all. He is like really slimy. He is really slimy. He kind of has a deal with Sho's mom to try to like get a scandal on Iwaki or whatever. But Sho wants to work his way to the top of the film industry and sleeps with Chiba. He sleeps with the executive to do it, and his mom is all for it. And it's like, what the hell? And Katao finds out, but Katao doesn't want to tell Iwaki because he knows Iwaki will freak out, and he's afraid with Iwaki's heart condition it'll make him even more stressed. So he's like, we just won't talk about this. And he lets it continue. Well, guess what happens? Iwaki finds out, and it's this big, giant ordeal. It's a mess. It's a hot mess. Sho is a hot mess. There's some really cool imagery where Sho is like walking around Tokyo and sees his father's image everywhere, and he's like, he feels this disconnect yet connection to his biological father. It's crazy. They run a paternity test. Iwaki is the father. It's this big thing, and Iwaki at the end of it, Yosuke gets jealous because Yosuke is like, are you going to leave me for your actual son and consider him your son and not me? And Iwaki's like, no. So it's this big ordeal. It's a bunch of drama. I won't spoil that. I'll let you all read that because it's just a mess. But in the end, of course, because Iwaki and Katao love each other, they work it out. And he works it out with Sho. He ends up working it out. He basically ditches the mom. He's like, get out of our lives. And with Yosuke, he works it all out. And to prove to Yosuke that Yosuke is a part of their family, because Yosuke is concerned at this point that he's going to get left out now that there's an actual son that Iwaki has. And Iwaki's like, no, I'm not going to leave you out. So what he does is Iwaki, he gives Yosuke a key to their apartment. He gives Yosuke the key. And he's like, if you ever need to come visit us, come visit us. Because he's like, my apartment is your home. Like, you are our son. You're practically our son. Even though you're my nephew by marriage, you're practically our son. You can come anytime and visit. And he gives him the key, and they make up, and it's really great. So we cut to years later after that. So Sho has turned around. Things have turned around. Sho is making a career. Sho is acting alongside Yosuke in a lot of productions because the film industry finds out that Iwaki is the biological father of Sho, and they think it's this big grand thing like, oh my god, Iwaki's birth son and Katao's nephew, it's like they're fated to work together just like their uncle and father were, and it's like, you know, it's a big thing. And Sho and Katao, Sho and Yosuke don't like have a thing at all. There's too much of an age gap there, but the press thinks it's really fun, so they end up on a lot of projects together. But the whole time this has been going on, through volumes 1 through 5 and towards volume 6, there's been all these scares with Iwaki. There's been all these scares. It's been really freaky, and I keep thinking something's going to happen. Like, I don't like the fact that he has arrhythmia. I don't like it. Something's going to go wrong, and it just leaves you with an uneasy feeling. So then, in volume 6, it starts out with this futuristic chapter that takes place in the future. Like hundreds of years in the future, like 100 years in the future. And it was very confusing at first. Like, reading it first, I was like, I had to go back and reread it because I was like, wait, what's happening? So it takes place in the future. And this is volume 6. It reminded me of Void by Zariah Ranmaru for a part of it. I was like, what is this? But there's a future chapter. It's kind of weird. But it takes place like around 100 years in the future, okay? And it takes place, there's this guy named Katsugaya. And Katsugaya works for this like space force or space group that's like related to like Japanese NASA, basically. I think they call it JASA. And yeah, it's a Japanese Space Association. What am I doing? I'm American, you know. But anyway, Katsugaya is in the space group, and he like gets caught up in like this like espionage plot. He nearly gets killed, but he's rescued by a guy named Katao. And you're like, oh, okay, this is the future. So is this like, it's like Iwaki and Katao's like, is it related to Yosuke? How's it? What? But Yosuke has a different last name at the time. So you're like, what's going on? You're like, how's it related to Katao? Did they have a kid? Did they adopt a kid and this is the kid of their kid? So you get all excited. You're like, oh, so Katao and them have a kid at some point. Fun times. But anyway, so you find out that Katao and Katsugaya are going to have these like artificial intelligent replicas of them go off into space and try to find a new inhabitable planet, because guess what? We've screwed everything up on Earth and we're running out of time for the Earth to still exist. Global warming's ruining it, so we only have a limited time left. And it's like, seems legit. So there's these AI replicas of them that are going to go out and try to colonize a new planet, right? And it's kind of cool. It's like BL in space. These guys are going to come out, and you find out that two major things have happened in the past that have changed the future. And one was that gay marriage was legalized in Japan. That's a thing that had happened in the story in the past. And you find out that some very passionate individual that used to be in the film industry, like, worked towards gay marriage. And you're like, oh, okay, well, so it's Kitao or Iwaki. Nice. And then you find out that there was this, like, advancement in science. And the advancement in science allowed for, basically, like, made impreg a thing. That's the only way I can describe it. Is it, like, made they give it a name, like single entity insemination, where you don't need to have two partners. Like, it's like an artificial womb is created, and it's like making a child with an artificial womb. And that's the technology of how this, like, AI replicas are going to, like, reproduce in space. And it's like, okay, interesting. But yeah, so, and then one of the scientists is like the result of that. So you find out that that the film star from long ago actually, pioneered this technology and pioneered the advancements in legislation to get this gay marriage legalized. And you're like, oh, okay. And then the line is thrown out that, after their partner died, and you're like, wait, what? What? So you think, because Kitao is there, I was like, so is this confirming that Iwaki dies? Is this confirming that Iwaki dies, and then Kitao, like, goes in Congress, and what? And I was getting freaked out at this point, because I was like, why did you give us this futuristic chapter that's all really hopeful and everything and really cool, and it's setting up that one of our main characters is going to die early? Oh. Shit. Right? And it just sets the tone. You're like, crap. So, from there we go into the rest of Volume 6, and everything seems like it's going all right. And all the telltale signs are there from then on. Like things are going good. Everything's great with the family. Yosuke and Sho are getting along. They plant a damn tree out in their yard, like where the red fern grows. I was like, oh no, you did not just plant a tree. like that's a telltale sign something's about to go down. I've seen Forrest Gump. No! And so then, yeah. So Iwaki has a lot of, he keeps having fainting spells. He keeps, like, collapsing, and things don't look good. And you're like, what the hell? Something bad's going to happen. And on one of the movie sets, to add more stress to Iwaki, Kitao falls on one of the set, and he bumps his head. And he bumps his head on set for this movie. And it seems like a pretty bad fall. Like, he bumps his head really hard. And you're like, ugh. And they tell him he should go to the hospital, but it's been one of those things where he hasn't seen Iwaki all week, and he's like, I don't want to go to the hospital. I don't want to stress Iwaki out. I'm going to go straight home and see him. And so he does. They have lots of smut. Or they try to. They initiate the smut, and then Kitao says, no, I don't feel good. He's like, I don't really feel like it. And at that point I was like, wait, what? So he doesn't initiate the smut. He stops it. And Kitao has always been our guy to initiate. Kitao has, like, throughout this entire series, for 20 volumes, has been the guy to initiate. And Kitao's like, no, I'm not feeling it. I just want to cuddle next to you. And I was like, okay. And then they, like, have this great moment. They cuddle. Everything's great. And then they both, like, go sleep in separate beds. And because they have their two little beds side by side. And, like, they wish each other good night. And Kitao has this big monologue about how their relationships come all this way. And I was like, oh my God. And he's like, our relationships come so far. We've gone through so many hardships. And I love this man so much. And I've never been happier. And he, like, smiles. And he, like, goes to sleep with a smile on his face. And I was like, you're not about to do this. And then it shows Iwaki waking up the next day. And he goes to wish Kitao goodbye. And Kitao isn't moving. And he freaks out, and it is so painful. And you come to find out that Katao had a brain hemorrhage from that fall on set. And because he didn't go to the hospital and get it checked out, he just died. And so, and I'm... Ugh. And it's so damn sad. It's so damn sad. It's really sad. Because you expect the whole time, it's like the biggest red herring. You think something's going to happen to Iwaki, and no. And it's so, and seeing Iwaki suffer without him, it's like the opposite of Winter Cicada. It's like the opposite of Winter Cicada. And I'm getting so emotional because these chapters where this happens, where he dies, like you followed them for 20 volumes and then this happens. No. And he gets so freaked out and he's like, I can't live without him. He's like, no, I can't do it. And so they have the funeral. They have the funeral and it's horrifically sad, and Iwaki just doesn't talk to anybody because he's so upset. And he goes back to his house, and he goes to the backyard, and it's like Winter Cicada. He's like, I can't live without this man. And he has a knife, and he's going to slit his throat because he can't take it. And at that moment, right before he's about to do it, Yosuke shows up because way back a couple volumes ago, Iwaki gave him the key. That he was always welcome there if he ever wanted to come home. And he does. And he gets mad at Iwaki, and he gets so mad at him. He's like, you're not thinking of anybody else but yourself right now. He's like, if you go, I'll have no one. He's like, I'll have lost my uncle and I'll have lost you. And he's like, please don't do that. And it's so damn sad. I was like, I'm crying now, but I was bawling my eyes out reading it. I was like, oh my God. Because you just don't think it's going to happen. You're like, she won't kill off this character, and she does. And it's just, and you're like, well, she won't show Iwaki going through all this trauma, and she does. And then for Yosuke to come in there, it's like, oh my God. And him and Yosuke they bond so much, and he treats Yosuke like a son. And then they go to the grave. They go and talk to the dad, to Katao's father. And oh my God. And then this whole final volume is so tragic. And then Iwaki's like, I want to pay for a grave for your son. I want to buy him a grave, like an actual burial grave, and I want to be buried next to him when I die. And the family's like, that's really sweet of you, but they're like, we don't have anybody to tend to the grave. They're like, it's expensive. And Iwaki's like, the money's no option, I'll buy it. And they're like, well, who's going to tend to the grave? He's like, when you die, who's going to tend to it? And then Yosuke's like, I'll tend to it. He's like, I'll tend to it because they're like my father. They're like my dad's. And so he agrees to tend to their grave. Oh God, he says he'll do it. He says he'll tend to their grave. It'll be fine. And so they agree to it. The cherry blossom tree blooms. Of course it does. And it grows really strong. And the two of them stay together and take care of one another. And then, like you do, it comes to years later, and Iwaki has to have heart surgery. And you know it's coming. But he has to have heart surgery. And at the end of, and as he's having surgery, he sees the white light, and he sees Katao standing there, and Katao's like, I've waited for you. And he's like, I'm ready. If you want to come with me, I'm ready. He's like, Yosuke will be all right. And he dies during surgery. And Iwaki dies during surgery, and it shows Katao, and he's just miserable and sad. But he gets over it. He's miserable and sad that Iwaki died. But then you know what the worst part is? Is that way back in volume 9 or 10, way back before Alive, way back volumes ago, there was this part I forgot to mention. It was, I think, way back in volume 8 or 9. It was one of the earlier volumes. But it was during Valentine's Day in the volume, and Iwaki forgot to get Katao a gift because Katao was he didn't want a gift, and Iwaki forgot to give him a gift. And Katao got mad because he's like, well, just because I didn't want a gift doesn't mean you weren't supposed to get me one anyway. And so Katao ends up showing him the gift that he got him, and it becomes this big thing. It was a set of diamonds, 6 diamonds is what he got. And he's like, these 6 diamonds represent our love for each other, and that it's eternal and it can't be broken, etc. It's really lovey-dovey. No. We find out that Iwaki's final request was that when he gets cremated, that Yosuke puts the diamonds in the urn and puts it next to Katao's so that they can be together in their eternal love. And right about the time he dies on the operating table, it turns out that Iwaki is the one that pushed the legalization of gay marriage in Japan, and because of him, like right as he dies, it gets passed. And then he was also the one that started this whole science thing. And you come to find out that Yosuke, because he felt like Katao and Iwaki were more his father figures than his actual father, he goes and legally changes his last name back to his mother's maiden name, which was Katao. And so the Katao in the future story is his grandson and the great-grandson of Iwaki and Katao. So yeah, some red fern grows. Sadness, just pain. It's beautiful. I love the ending of it. It's so damn sad, though. I was, like I said, I put it on Twitter. I was like literally bawling my eyes out. I was crying so hard. And I was like, are you kidding me? Because I'd spent a week and a half reading this story and getting attached to these characters. And then the mangaka's like, 2020! And I'm like, God, why? I know this year sucks, but why? But I give the mangaka credit because to go there and say, yeah, we're doing this, I mean, they didn't have to. And it is beautiful because it strengthens Iwaki and Yosuke's relationship. It's so damn sad. And it is cheesy when he dies on the operating table and goes back with Katao. But at that point, you've just been through the ringer of seeing him look so miserable that you're like, you just want them to be together again. And the final shot of them is them together. So I was like, I'll take it. I'll take it at this point. I'll take Ghost making out. Ghost smut, I'll take it. Give it to me. So yeah, I've talked for a long time about this series. Do I recommend it? Yes, I do. I really do. If you are a fan of yaoi, if you like BL and you've not read this series, go read it. Now, granted, there is a lot of smut, and you think I'm exaggerating, but no, like every chapter there is smut. It is like 70, well, I want to say it's 70% smut, but that's hard because every chapter has substance, so it's like 50-50. Yeah, there's a lot of smut, but there is story to it too. But yeah, if you're not uncomfortable with a lot of sex in your story, then this will be fine. But story-wise, you get really attached to these characters as the story goes on, especially Katao and Iwaki. And the Alive series, again, if you did not want a sad ending, you should just stick with the original 14 volume because it ends fine. Like, I'm glad I read Alive, I am, but if somebody doesn't like a happy ending or a sad ending, if somebody's like, I don't like angsty endings, don't read Alive. It's rough. It's rough, but it's like it hurts so good, right? Like, it was painful and I cried, but it was good. I will remember it. I will remember Embracing Love regardless, but after Alive, I'll really remember it because I was like, that's that series. Mm-hmm. And I can't believe she wrote on it for 20 years. It's a very big testament. I wish all the series were in English because I would like to support the official release and buy the actual volumes, but I can't because it's not in the official. I would buy Alive. I'd buy Alive in English. It's the last volume's so good, but it's not available, so sad days. But yeah, so I definitely recommend this series. This ended up being a lot longer of a discussion than I intended, but it was worth it. But yeah, I highly recommend this series. Definitely go out and read it, and I think you'll enjoy it. If you like BL series, you should definitely check out Embracing Love. It was really good. But I hope you enjoyed the reaction. I hope you enjoyed my ramblings about the series. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So I wanted to do Embracing Love because I didn't get a chance to go over it in Januyaoi, and after watching Winter Cicada, I was like, oh, I have to watch the series that it's based off of, and I'm so glad I did it. So thank you to Sarah Linda. I will say, Sarah Linda, give you a shout out here because you were the first person to comment on Winter Cicada, and you're like, you should read Embracing Love, and I was like, and so thank you for that. I'm really glad that I did. But like I said, I want to get to some more BL series throughout the year, but they may not be as long of a reaction as this or a discussion as this, but I do want to review some more BL series as we go this year until we get to our next Januyaoi. So in the meantime, I hope y'all had a wonderful Valentine's Day. If you stop at volume 14, it's a great Valentine's Day read. If you go on to Alive, then sure. I guess it's still a good Valentine's Day read too. But in any case, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more reactions.